Hey everyone, it is late at night and I am Norman. As most of you know, I actually own two Smiths Everests. I own one with the original dial, and I also own the gilt dial variant. But recently, one of you out there was kind enough to lend me their Smiths Everest, the Honeycomb variant. Tonight we're going to be looking at all three of these watches, and it's really just a matter of three different dials. Everything else about these watches is pretty much the same. Very subtle differences. With the original Everest that I own and the gilt dial, for example, the crystal seems to be a little bit more curvy on the edges, maybe a little taller on the gilt dial variant, but they're pretty much the same watch. So tonight it's a tale of three dials. So let us begin. Alright, so we'll start off with the first Everest watch that I ever purchased, and this has the original dial. The markers on this watch are not patinaed, however they aren't super stark white either, so I feel like they really work with this dial. And as you can see, the lettering down here is just kind of etched into the dial, so it's really clean. All you really notice is the branding up there below the 12 o'clock position. And the edge of the crystal on this watch is a little bit tighter than with the gilt dial variant. So this curve is a bit smaller. There's a little bit less distortions on the edges, but this is just a nice utilitarian clean dial. It has a matte finish to it. The seconds markers are bright, so that kind of adds some detail. Some activity going on the dial there. And after hunting for a clasp for my old Everest, I finally decided to just go for another one. And I found this piece on eBay, brand new, still with the stickers on. The bracelet was still wrapped up and everything, and it wasn't super terribly expensive. It was definitely more than retail, but you can see the edge of the crystal there. Bit more distortion going on, and I love box crystals, so I'm pretty stoked about that. In this one, you can see Everest called out there because it is done in the gold tone, just like the branding is, and the seconds track. And there's a really subtle sunburst to the dial. You can kind of see it there a bit. And this dial is a lot darker than the original dial. I had no idea that I would actually really love a gilt dial variant. I kind of shied away from it for a while, as I mentioned in a previous video about this watch. The indices on this also are not patinaed, but they are slightly creamy, I feel, which is great. It isn't super stark white, just like the original dial, so it works out well. This watch just kind of takes elegance to the next level. It's still very tooly, but there's kind of a fanciness to it. But it's pretty subtle still. I really love this watch and have been wearing it a ton. I was actually thinking about selling this piece because it would probably go for a decent amount. However, as I mentioned in a previous video, the micro adjustments on these watches don't cover the full length of a link. So if you are right in between removing a link and having this not be loose enough, or adding that link and having this not be snug enough, you're kind of stuck with it either a little bit loose or a little bit tight. So I may end up hanging on to this and having it set a bit loose for during the summer and in hot weather, because this one is just a little bit too snug when things get really warm outside. However, when it's cold, this isn't flopping around on my wrist like the other one, so I might end up keeping both. We'll see. And last but not least is the Honeycomb Dial that was generously loaned to the channel so that I could share it with you all, and look at that. That is pretty crazy. When the light hits it from certain angles, it almost looks like the dial is kind of a gray color. Other times it looks just like the gilt dial. It looks like a deep black. It's definitely very subtle. When it's on the wrist, usually it just kind of looks like a black dial. At least when I've had this on a bit. I'll have to put it on and take it outside. Get some great photos out there and see what it looks like in that situation. You can see that the markers are a darker color. They're almost a patina. They're like a dark cream, which kind of gives it an even more vintage vibe than the other two. However, I feel like this one is kind of on par with the gilt dial. It's a bit more elegant than the standard dial. The crystal on this seems to be more like my original Everest. But yeah, if I hadn't purchased the gilt dial and was still considering purchasing a second Everest, I feel like it might be a toss-up between this and the gilt dial, because that is pretty cool. On this one, Everest and the branding is done in white, which is interesting in contrast to the somewhat patinaed loom of the markers in the hands. The minutes track on this is kind of light, like the original dial one. That's a really cool looking dial. Alright, so let's do a wrist shot of each of these. See what it's like when you're wearing them. Alright, so let me take off my great looking Maven watch. Such an awesome little piece. And here is the original dial, Everest, on my 7-inch wrist. And you can see how that is pretty utilitarian compared to the other two. It's more of just a straight up sports watch, without any kind of fanciness to it. And the old style clasp. And I have this on the bracelet that isn't the rivet bracelet. I really like that one, so I put it on the gilt dial watch. Yeah, just nice and utilitarian. The dial comes off as more minimal, since you can't really see the text. Very cool. And there's the gilt dial. And look at how fancy that looks with the gold highlights there. We have the rivet bracelet and the new style clasp. The sunburst dial looks really great. And I like the gold highlights. Look at the text on the dial. How it kind of vanishes and then at other times catches the light. Gorgeous. And the honeycomb dial. See how that kind of looks lighter when the light hits it from certain angles? And then at other times it looks dark. That is really cool. Yeah, it's really fun how that changes from moment to moment. And the cream color indices work really well with the aesthetic. That is a really cool variant. I like it. So there you have it, 3 different dials on 3 different Smiths Everests. And that honeycomb dial is really crazy. It's subtle, and yet depending on the light, it isn't. It's kind of cool how it changes in color and appearance. That is just amazing. Again, thanks so much for lending this watch to the channel. I think I'll do a full review of it, even though I've done reviews of the other 2 Everests, just in case someone out there hasn't seen the other ones. Who knows? Thanks for watching.